the environment, the way they're living in squalor actually hurts the environment instead of moving to the industrial system and the new advanced cleaner system. So this is economic warfare, is it not?
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, the developing world is poised to have the same miracle that the Western world had in the 20th century, except for unfounded global warming fears. Just to give you a few more examples, white wealthy Westerners in England, a grocery market chain, announced they were going to buy local. Well, this didn't sit well with poor Kenyan farmers whose livelihood depended on food exports to England. That's another example of this. You have across, again, using India, environmentalists have opposed various dams to bring in hydroelectric power because of environmental impacts. And I've seen it down in the Amazon rainforest. I did a documentary in 2000. Wealthy celebrities fly in on carbon-spewing jets, stop some development down there, and then they fly back home to their Bel Air mansion. This is a new form of colonialism. It's a colonialism that keeps poor people poor. I interviewed Dr. Walter Williams. He's a African-American economist, George Mason University. He said that many Westerners want to see the developing world poor because it's almost like going to visit, treating people like they're zoo. There's actually a whole thing called poverty tourism now, where you go and you see people live and you think, oh, isn't that neat, isn't that great? And the bottom line is environmental policy is going to keep them living that way.
That's right. And these control freak communists who work for the big banks, because, again, they don't want a free market either. That's why the ultra-rich always fund the poor to set up socialism, to conduit the money and power to the elites. They are saying they want the same system here. They want to cut the population. Brown's head eco-advisor says cut the population from 60 million to 30 million, cut the population from 25 million. So they want to bring that here. And then they're going to fly around on their limousine liberal helicopters while we're in squalor. These are control freaks. I've talked to them.
I compare it to the old Soviet Politburo, where the members of the party got all the perks. You have Arnold Schwarzenegger, who in his radio address just 3 weeks ago told Californians that to lower their carbon footprint, they should be air drying clothes, and that if you air dried your clothes every day for 6 months, you'd save, X amount of pounds. The same Arnold Schwarzenegger who the LA Times a year before chastised them for commuting to work in a private jet, a daily commute in his private jet. He's now telling Californians to hang their clothes out in out in the air. This is the level, and this is Al Gore flying the private jets, Leonardo DiCaprio. This is it's that two-tiered system. The masses live one way, and the party rulers live another. And
but that's okay. That's okay because DiCaprio and Schwarzenegger and all of them are heavily invested in the carbon credit companies. They buy those from themselves.
And also they'll brag. I mean, at one point, Gore's film, he bragged that it was carbon neutral. Someone did the calculations. He only paid, I want to say the number was under $500. It was some absurd number. You can make a whole Hollywood film with all the carbon and claim you're carbon neutral for just $500. I don't think other people are getting charged so low. But we're finding Hollywood actors buying, for all the flying they do and for being in entertainment, they're buying offsets, and what's happening is they're either preserving land in Africa or planting trees. Before I left the U.S. Senate, I met with the Norwegian embassy, the Norwegian embassy, and they were touting this new thing that they're essentially going to pay poor countries not to develop. And this is the ultimate form of the new colonialism I'm talking about. I told them I hope they failed. This was in a meeting in the U.S. Senate. They sought it out with me. I said all that's going to happen is your money from the UN and from international agencies are going to go to corrupt third world dictators. They're going to get the money. The people are going to suffer as their country continues not to develop, as they're living in huts, made of dung. These wealthy Norwegians are going to sit back and say, we're saving the planet. Isn't this great? And we're helping these poor people by giving to these corrupt governments. That is what's wrong right now in terms of international policy. What we need to do, I interviewed a South African activist who said it best. If the Western wealthy world really doesn't want the developing world to develop, they ought to lead by example. In other words, they should level cities like Washington, Rotterdam, London, and return them back to swamps and jungles before they can tell people in Africa and people in South America and Asia not to develop their land. And that didn't go over too well with a lot of development actors. This was at a UN conference that the South African said it. But I think he was dead on. We have no business telling these countries, paying them, bribing them, whatever word you want to use, not to develop when it's not our kids that are dying of high infant mortality and short life expectancy. I interviewed Chevy Chase on the Mall on one of these Earth Days, the actor. He said socialism works. Cuba was the model. This is the mindset of the modern environmental movement, and sadly, it's infected many in this new administration.
And meanwhile, Chevy Chase is worth literally $100 million or more. Talking to these people in government and reading their writings, the high-level ones cold-bloodedly know this is a business, this is to control, this is to freeze the third world. I mean,
they're very honest. Ben Cardin, Democrat from Maryland, told the Washington Post in April, global warming laws in Washington represent the greatest, the biggest potential, the greatest revenue-generating proposal of our time, was the exact quote. So you can imagine, they don't care about the science. They care about the greatest revenue-generating proposal of their time. And remember, he who controls carbon controls life. It's a bureaucrat's dream to control carbon dioxide. We had a scientist from Princeton come and testify, Will Happer, 200 peer-reviewed scientific studies. He said the level of control that we're contemplating when you declare what we exhale from our mouth a pollutant is something that George Orwell didn't even contemplate in 1984. We are ceding over. We have the UK, a carbon card proposal where the government's going to monitor individual people, their carbon allowances. They're going to monitor how much you drive, where you set your thermostat. California's already tried regulating thermostats. This is a
No, I had the government advisor on, and he said you will all be rationed, and you only have enough food to weigh a certain amount, and bureaucrats will control every facet of your life. They're now putting the satellite tracker boxes in the cars to now control how fast you drive. I mean, it's all happening. This is their model. They admit, as you know, sir, but
well,
the audience.
President Bush started the bank bailout, and then Obama continued with the stimulus packages, and now nationalizing, we're nationalizing banks, we're nationalizing automobiles. Just to put a simple line out, never before in U.S. history has more power and wealth and decision-making been concentrated in the hands of so few. The left will talk endlessly about, the corrupt corporations, big business. The bottom line is at least big business has shareholders, has accountability to the public. Government now, we have more power and control in the smallest amount of hands that we've ever had in U.S. history, and it's only going to continue. And this is, it's an inevitable result, beginning with the New Deal and continuing with the Great Society.
5 more minutes with you on the other side. 5 more minutes with Marc Morano. It's ClimateDepot.com. But then above the government is a very small group of private corporations that operate like Spectre, and that's the New World Order. That's the Bilderberg Group. Okay, but I agree with him. We'll be right back. I get rabid on this subject and just start spewing facts, and they're facts. And they just say no. In fact, Al Gore, a few weeks ago, and I wanted to ask Marc Morano of ClimateDepot.com about this, former Senate advisor and aide and researcher, one of the preeminent people, kind of a clearinghouse to expose all this. And they said, what about all these thousands of scientists? I mean, there are thousands and thousands. I've seen letters of 10,000, 20,000 they sign. The vast majority saying it's all a fraud. The top climatologists, the top experts on the Arctic, they're everywhere. Just saying, look, it's a fraud. The people that look at the sun, all of it. And Al Gore just said, well, there's people that think, there's flying saucers and we went to and we didn't go to the moon. And that's what they do. They just say, first they said everyone agrees. And they said, oh, everybody who's credible agrees. And then, well, everybody who's sane believes. And meanwhile, it's just an unbelievable fraud. And then they brought up to him, well, what about how Ken Lay of Enron came up with this idea for carbon credits? And then Al Gore says, I don't know anything about that. And he goes, well, your partner was part of it. And he goes, no, he's not. Then we went and looked it up. Al Gore knows that and is involved. I mean, these people are just despicable. How do we beat them? How do we stop these bastards? They're in the Senate right now. They're trying to ram it through. They're saying on the news, we are dead unless we have an international body that taxes and regulates every facet of our lives, and if we don't have weekly bureaucrats inspecting our homes.
Yeah, real quick, just so people don't think, I'm being conspiratorial here, or, Jacques Chirac, the French president's own words were the UN Global Warming Treaty Kyoto was the first step to authentic global governance. These are their own words. EU official came out and said that the Kyoto represented leveling the playing field for the world, meaning the take from the rich. I was at UN conferences where they're proposing a global carbon tax on countries, and guess what? The wealthy nations get hit the hardest, and guess what? The UN would decide to administer the funds. These are their own words that they're saying, and they're being very open about their goals when they do this. You mentioned Al Gore and the astronaut. I can't let this go by. He told the House hearing 2 weeks ago that he compared global warming skeptics to people who think the moon landing was faked. Well, the bottom line is that talking point is now moot, as one of the moon landers himself, astronaut Jack Smith, and a geologist, came out and declared himself a skeptic